Genna, I was thinking about it earlier, and I think you and I have known each other almost 20 years. I think beginning with Medfin, and since that time, we've followed many different paths between us, but we've remained pretty connected, and at the same time pretty immersed in the dental space and in the community. You were lucky enough, or clever enough to set up a thriving practice in the Central Coast and then the Hunter Valley. So you've obviously set up practices. Like, in your mind, what are the 5 things, if you see, a colleague at a dental party or like at a cocktail party, what are the 5 things you tell them that they need to know?
There's actually 6, if I can run through them. The first one, I think it's really important to get 3 to 5 years experience in general practice, and maybe in a variety of practices like I had the opportunity to do so. Work in Sydney for a couple of years, work overseas, work with different practitioners, different equipment, different methods, because you taught one thing at uni, but there's a number of ways of approaching it, and you need to feel confident with that variety of clinical ways, because you'll be faced with a variety of clinical issues as a dentist. And the more comfortable you are with that, the more better prepared you are for your own practice. When it comes to actually choosing a location, I found the most important thing there is having a location which has got high visibility, so people can see your practice, and market it in a way which does more than just give you your phone number. You want to have space so that your signage is there, and maybe that's a topic for another conversation, but that marketing is really important for people to get a feel for who you are and what sort of quality of dentistry you're providing through your signage, because that's the only opportunity you have sometimes.
I feel like I feel like you're a bit of a pioneer of the kind of big visual images, the big Photoshop images.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm referring to. Big images that you can see half a kilometre away of a smiling family is more important than a list of services that you offer, a shopping list of services.
Yeah.
So location is really important. That's the location. You want to look at a growth area, because in a growth area, people are coming in and your practice will grow a lot faster in an area where there's new families coming in, they're looking for local services, and you're going to be one of the people that are going to provide that, and you'll grow with the community. I would also suggest that you need to have an accountant that's got your finances up to date, because when you're going to go to Credible and ask for finances, the first thing they're going to say is, are your tax returns done? Have you got a business plan? What are your finances like? And the last thing I would suggest is that you do some practice management courses, because part of owning a practice is managing staff, managing other dentists, managing all the business needs that you have, and they don't touch on that at university at all. They just do the clinical work, and yet you've got to run a business. There's a business side to it. So the 6 things that I'm saying is wait 5 years, get a location with exposure, develop in a growth area, make sure your finances are in place, and do some practice management courses.
Yeah. I think, we're finding a lot that, that saying in residential property where they say, you rent where you want to live, but you buy where you think it's a good investment. And I think we find that with people, we're saying to them, when you think about setting up a practice, think not about how close it is to home or anything like that. Think about where it'll be successful. Think about where you'll thrive, where there's a lot of population growth, and live where you want, but, maybe be prepared to travel to where you'll build a really successful business.
I think that's the case. I live on the North Shore, and yet I practiced in Newcastle for quite a while. You've got to go where where the opportunities are.
Yeah, and that's a couple of hour trip. That's that's the extreme, I suppose. But yeah, I think you're right. You've got to go where the demand is.
Well, at one stage I was working at in Glebe, and it took me longer to get to Glebe in the morning than it did to Warners Bay in Newcastle. It was an hour and a quarter, no stops on the expressway, whereas it was an hour and a half from Pymble to Glebe in peak hour.
Yeah, probably no different today. Although maybe COVID has changed the dynamic a little bit, it could be a bit quicker.
Yes,
and so then, how on earth? Obviously it's got the same surname, but how on earth did you end up with Levitch Designs, and then how did that cross over with the work that you did at Pacific Smiles Group?
Look, that's a complex question, and let me give you, a very brief overview. I'm extremely fortunate to be married to a beautiful, talented, and hardworking woman who's got phenomenal design skills. She started designing dental practices back in the mid-90s. She'd worked with me as a dental nurse and for her, so she knew what her husband would do. And she also did, her final year thesis was ergonomics in the dental surgery. So she had very good background to it. So when a friend of ours said to her, look, you're doing all these shops and that you're designing, can you design a dental surgery for me? It worked out really well. And so the business gradually grew. So that was running on the side in the late 90s, running from home. At the same time, I had bought into a practice in Warners Bay, and there was 5 dentists in a loose partnership. We had 5 practices between us. Alex Abrahams was one of them, and we used to sit and talk for a long time about how we could move from a partnership structure, because that's what was allowed in those days, to a corporate structure, so we could grow in a way that a company can grow. It's very hard for a partnership to grow. So the law changed in '98, and we then sold our practices into a company. 3 of the dentists, myself, Alex and Alison Hughes, wanted to do that. 2 of the other dentists were very concerned about this move and decided not to. That was okay. They were left with a practice of their own. But the 3 of us then put our practices into this company, and it was Pacific Smiles Group. That's how it started. So I was one of the founders of Pacific Smiles, and worked with, I was a founding shareholder, founding director, and I really enjoyed working with that, because that was the entrepreneurial side of me that I really loved. And this was a rare opportunity. In my view, it was a multi-generational opportunity, because the law had changed and allowed a different structure, and the structure could then grow indefinitely, whereas you can't do it with a partnership because it's very limited in what you can do. So I stayed with Pacific Smiles for about 7 years. Anne's business grew, and Anne and I had always wanted to work together, so I made the decision finally to work exclusively with Levitch Design, but we still designed a lot of the practices, the early practices for Pacific Smiles. Pacific Smiles went from 3 practices to 17 in the first 3 or 4 years. It's now got 94 practices, and it's still going from strength to strength. Working with Anne in Levitch Design Associates enabled me then to provide a service to dentists, and we worked with maybe 350, 400 dentists around Australia, designing and then building practices as well. And it was during that time that I started working with you, because one of the bottlenecks in a practice is getting the finances right. And I met you and started working with you. At the time, if you remember, Stafford, there was not a lot of spreadsheets, and Excel had just come into being, and we developed some spreadsheets to give us a feasibility on how a practice would do, what sort of income they needed to pay for their loans, what sort of growth would be expected in the first few years. And I've still got that still is the core of my feasibilities that I do for dentists who still want a hand to do things. But I remember that you provided a lot of the background banking figures of what a bank would expect, and that's what started our relationship, and it's grown from there. Yeah. So, just to answer your question though, they were complex years in the early 2000s, and I really enjoyed seeing Pacific Smiles grow and Levitch Design grow as well. There was a bit of a time conflict for me, as I couldn't be involved in both, but it was a lot of fun, and it was very rewarding time for me.
Yeah, it's strange for me to think about the fact that it was one of the first things that I did on Excel. Like, that's how long ago it was. Or it feels like it anyway. But I mean, like, you've obviously seen so many different sides of dentistry and the profession. Like, you've been involved in corporate, you've been a designer, you've been a practitioner, but it sounds like there's a bit of a common thread in everything you've done around understanding consumer psychology. So, like, what's your advice for a young dentist starting out, spent a long time qualifying, but got a bit more of an appetite for the business side of the profession?
Look, it is a very big topic. Let me just talk on one small aspect of it. When we were doing, Levitch Design was doing corporate branding for a practice, doing a logo for them, putting together a choice of names which they could call themselves, doing all their marketing for them. One of the things I noticed was that the dentists would often go to their mates, to their colleagues, and say, what do you think of this? Because they're concerned about breaking any ethical boundaries. And so if they're getting the okay from their mates, they kind of feel comfortable with it. And I don't think that's the right approach. I think you need to get a graphic designer, you need to get a marketer, you need to get the view of what the general public responds to, rather than what the rest of the profession responds to. And because we look at dentistry, because we've got our qualifications, we've got the letters after our name, we look at our clinical skills, and the general public doesn't understand any of that at all. So if you can change your point of view from looking at your practice as a dentist to looking at your practice as a general public, you will see something completely different, and it will enable you to market in a way in which people actually understand what it is that you're saying and feel comfortable in coming to see you. The whole purpose of marketing is to reduce the barriers to apprehension. Once people come in their door and see you and see what a lovely guy you are, they're going to stay. It's getting them through the door that was what it's all about. And you don't have to sell your dentistry to get people through the door. You just need to make it comfortable for people to come in.
Yeah. Look, I think it's one of the things our team can, obviously being very focused only on these professions, can give the insight into what peers are doing in the space. But it's only, I think you're right, it's only one part of it. I think it's good to understand what peers are doing, but we're always saying, and we're working with so many industry and professional participants, and we're saying you need to assemble a good team. And that's multiple people. These are fairly big businesses. They're significant businesses that people build these days. They're not little shingles. One chair practices, etc. They're much more significant and substantial businesses. Professional looking and marketing and keeping up with the competition. So I 100% agree. Like, you've got to assemble a good team.
The team is what it's all about. And if you're starting a practice and you're wanting to make a practice which has an impact on the general public and people talk about it, then you need to have a designer and a construction team that understands your vision, because you can't do it all yourself. You can't be a clinician and a designer and a marketer and a graphic designer. You've got to have a team behind you, and that's something that probably I didn't realise early in my working life, where I tried to be all things to all people. But I've realised, once I was an LDA, that putting the team together is what it's all about. And sometimes the team would involve 50, 60 people when you're doing a large project, and you've got to manage the team to get the best out of it. And that's a particular skill that not every dentist has, because we're used to working on our own, making our own decisions in our surgery. And this is a completely different mindset.
Yeah.
Well,
thank you so much for, sharing some of your insights today. It's been great. And so, really thanks on Credible's behalf for giving us your time.
It's a pleasure, Stafford. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And the reason I've come on to do this interview is because I understand how crucial finances are. It's one of the bottlenecks in practice growth, and I appreciate the services that you provided to the dental and medical community. And thank you for the opportunity.
Likewise. Well, thanks everybody for joining us today. I hope that you got something out of it. It's always good if you can take away a pearl or two. And obviously, if either Genna or myself can help you, then we're always available.
Sure we are.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.